Now we're after the hour, so let's start here. Well, it's a pleasure for me to introduce Chris Templeton, who's from Pacific University. And I got to know Chris because it's a long story, but I was on the job search up at Pacific when they hired Chris, or when they did. I wouldn't say we, but I was just on the beginning. I got a chance to see his CV and sort of in his seminar up there and his teaching seminar and so forth, and it was great stuff. So I was just like, oh man, you get right in down here. But I'm not going to steal his thunder on that because I'm gonna let the birds do the talking. Chris got his bachelor's degree at Denison University, so I know that's where Lindsay went to. Oh, you did too? Oh,
no, Ohio.
Jay, Ohio. Yeah.
Hooray for Ohio.
Yeah, Ohio. Then he did his PhD up at University of Washington, up at UW. And then he went overseas to Scotland to do his postdoc at St. Andrews. And then from there, he was hired here at Pacific University. He's now a tenured associate professor there. And so, without further ado, I'm going to let Chris talk about vocal function, coordination, and learning in pairs of neotropical wrens. And as he said at the beginning, how they do it. All right, Chris.
Boo, terrible pun, but I'm a sucker for a terrible pun. Thanks, Bob, and thank all of you for coming. It's my great pleasure to be here, and I'm so thankful that I could do it in person because I've had a really good time. I love Corvallis, I love Oregon State, and I've had a wonderful time this afternoon talking to various faculty and students. And I understand maybe there's some time to do that after the talk too. So hopefully I'll get to meet some more of you.
Yeah, I was going to say, let me just say one thing. I'm sorry to interrupt like that. We're going to go take Chris out afterwards too. So if anybody wants to join us for after seminar refreshments, we'll be doing that at Downward Dog. And rumor has it that Jamie's buying the first one. Oh, no. I'm buying the first one. Okay, sorry.
Oh, and I could take my mask off, I was told. So I'm definitely going to do that. Okay, so I was really happy to be invited down here. And I sort of thought a bit about what should I talk about. So I'm kind of an integrative biologist. I have lots of really diverse interests across different kinds of questions, different systems, different levels of analysis and whatnot. My kind of broad umbrella of my sort of core interests are really in trying to understand how ecological and evolutionary factors shape the behavior of animals. And in that, there we go. Oops. There's a few different kind of core avenues of research. So the first one focuses on chickadees and tits. And we're trying to understand how predator size and behavior, ecology, and eavesdropping all shape alarm calls in these birds in terms of the call structure and in terms of the information that's transferred from one individual to another. I'm also interested in sexual signals, so thinking about secondary sexual traits like this song sparrow's song, right? And trying to figure out not just what these songs mean, but how do they actually go about learning them, right? And so we've done a lot of work radio tracking young birds, some of the first field studies to look at song learning in wild birds. So looking at spatial use distribution, social networks, different kinds of social interactions birds have, as well as physiological factors such as various steroid hormones that affect the song learning program. And perhaps a little bit more recently, and just in the last few years, I've really gotten interested in how our behavior affects animals. In particular, how does noise, the ever-present anthropogenic noise that we're generating, how does that affect animals? And of course, I got into this because of the bioacoustic connection, but it turns out that it affects many other aspects of being an animal, such as, we've showed major effects on their cognitive performance. We're seeing effects on their social behavior, as well as thinking about populations and community structures. Okay, and so I sort of thought, which of these things should I be talking about? How should we do this? What would be most appropriate for this department? And then I got an email from Bob, and he was talking about all the terrible things that have happened over the last couple of years with COVID. And one of the other terrible things that he mentioned is that he hasn't been able to travel to his field site in Canada for 37 years. Is that what you said? And that was a little heartbreaking. And I sort of had the same feeling, right? I haven't been able to travel to the field, and maybe some of you haven't either. And so what I decided after I sort of read that email, I said, the thing that probably we all need right now is to go on a field trip. Okay, so today I am going to take you on a field trip. Does that sound good? And we're going to leave Oregon, okay? And we are going to go all together down to the tropics. And we're going to explore some really neat areas that have some super cool biology, okay? Our first stop is going to be Mexico. We're going to go to the province of Jalisco, okay? About 3 hours south of Puerto Vallarta is the little tiny town of Chimela. These islands are fantastic for seabirds. You got lots of boobies breeding on there. But if you go inland, maybe a mile or so, you end up here, which is the Chimela Research Station that's run by UNAM, which is the big research university in Mexico City. Yeah? It's a great place to work. If you're looking for a new field site, I totally recommend this. The food is fantastic. In fact, there's one woman, and it's her entire job is just to make desserts for lunch every day. Right? But in addition to great food and a nice location, this place is seriously cool in terms of the biology. You have huge rates of endemism, all kinds of really cool animals. So like super colorful birds, a very colorful snake that I found in my bedroom one night that freaked me out until I did some more research. You got lizards that squirt blood out of their eyes. You got another species of lizard that's one of only 2 venomous lizards in the world. Really cool, arthropods of a variety of sorts. And you have pumas that apparently don't like you recording birds in their territory and come down and growl at you from, the distance of this to the door for 5 minutes until you finally get up and pack up and go away. Lots of really neat animals, okay? Here are some pictures that I took the first time I went down there. And if you look at all these pictures together, one thing that kind of really strikes me, and maybe it strikes you, is that the backgrounds are all the same, right? You see that? There's a good reason for that. And that is because this is tropical dry forest. And for 9 months out of the year, it's just a kind of forest of sticks, right? And it's drought deciduous, doesn't rain a drop for 9 months of the year. And all the trees lose their leaves. But it does rain, and it starts in the spring. And when it rains, as soon as that first drop of rain comes down, the forest starts transforming, okay? Literally within a week, it will turn from this to that, okay? In just a week. And then, of course, all kinds of really neat animals come out, like terrestrial crabs that have been dormant for the last 9 months. Here's another snake for you. That one was hiding behind a soccer ball outside the dormitory. Marsupial mice, cool arthropods again, you name it, okay? But the reason that I brought you down here to Mexico today is to actually look at this little tiny bird, okay? So this is a wren known as the Happy Wren. Yeah, he looks happy, right? Even more important, he sounds happy, okay? And so as we go today, you're gonna see lots and lots of pictures like this. If you haven't seen a picture like this, it's called a sonogram. And it's a visual representation of the sound the animal makes, right? So if you play an instrument or if you can read sheet music or something like that, it's exactly the same principle, okay? So you should be able to follow along. We've got pitch on the y-axis. So this is high pitch and this is low pitch, right? And then we've got time on the x-axis, okay? So I'm going to start by playing this song, and I'm going to try and follow along with the cursor, see how well I do. And hopefully you can follow along because you're going to start getting a lot of these as the talk goes. Okay, ready? Yeah, it's hard, but you can get more practice, so don't worry. Okay. Hopefully, one of the things you're thinking right now is, well, who cares? Why are you talking about birdsong? Why should I care about birdsong? Right? Especially not the song of something as sillily named as the Happy Wren, right? Well, it's not just happy wrens that sing. It's all kinds of animals. So bioacoustics is a really important component of many animals' behavior, ecology, evolution, physiology, you name it. Okay, so many different species of animals use acoustic communication to deal with their daily needs and environments. Okay, birdsong in particular has become a really important model for all kinds of different aspects of biology. Right? So no matter what kind of biology you're interested in, we can probably learn something from birdsong. Be that ecology, evolution, learning, neuroscience, endocrinology. It's a great model, probably the best model for understanding our own language learning. There's a lot of work on cognition involved in birdsong and song learning. And it's also a great tool for conservation. Okay, so hopefully, okay, now you can say, oh yeah, I should care about birdsong. And hopefully, you know, for the rest of today, I'll convince you that it's so interesting that you definitely want to care. Okay? We'll come back to our Happy Wren. And I played the song for you, so you know what they sound like. Now, you say, oh, well, there's wrens in Oregon. Why go down to Mexico to study them? And the reason is that in this species of wren, this song that I just played for you is not produced just by that one bird, but actually by two. Okay? They work together to create a duet. And we can pull apart the different components that each sex produces. Okay, so you have a male and female pair that produce this song together. The male is shown on the top, and the female's part of the duet is shown on the bottom. We're going to keep with the blue and red theme as we go today. Okay? And so now if I play this for you, it should come out of the speakers in stereo, and you can hear how the two individuals work together. Okay, ready? Yeah, pretty cool, right? Okay, so you go down and you read the bird guides or the field guides for really anywhere in Central and South America, and they talk about the song of the male. Because it's almost impossible to tell that there's two individuals singing here unless you get one on either side of you like this. Okay. So with that, of course, acoustic duetting is not just found in birds. This is something that lots of animals do, from insects all the way up to whales, right? In terms of the size, and lots of different taxa. Many birds do it, so it's been best studied in birds. A whole bunch of different species are duetting. And if you look at the diversity of their songs, you see that there's a whole bunch of different ways to duet, right? So this first one, the eastern whipbird, the male sings, and then the female tacks something onto the end. Here's an oriole warbler, where the male sings one thing and the female sings a different thing, kind of at the same time. Okay? But then when you start getting down to these bottom two, you have what's called antiphonal duetting. So this alternating song phrases where you have sex-specific song phrases. The female sings one thing, the male sings another thing, and then they kind of go back and forth in this perfectly coordinated fashion. Okay? And these are really what I'm going to be talking about today. Okay? Happy wrens don't just sing one song, they have repertoires of songs. Right? So I played the one on the top for you before. Let's do the one on the bottom, just for something different. Okay, so you can hear that sounded a bit different, right? But it's still the same kind of trading off back and forth. Male phrase, female, male, female. Okay. From these three songs, you can hopefully see that there's sex-specific song phrases. So there's male songs and there's female songs. Okay. The duets vary in the type, they vary in the length, they vary in the overlap, and then either sex can initiate a duet or terminate a duet. With that as a background, here's the plan for today. Okay, so I'm going to tell you, or I'm going to answer 4 questions. Right? First is, what's the function of duetting? Okay. Why do they sing duets instead of just one bird singing? Why do pairs have duet repertoires? Okay. Why not just have a single song? How do pairs actually coordinate their songs so they get this kind of precise timing? And last, which is the thing that really got me into this system to start with, how do birds actually learn to duet? Okay, so there's our roadmap for today. Before I go any farther, let me introduce at least some of the collaborators. And really, there's a long list of people that have helped me here. But here are some of the really key people on the work that I'm going to tell you about. So Karen Odom, Nigel Mann, Tino Macias, Peter Slater, Carla Rivera, and Esme Queros are all really key people. So when I say we today, you can sort of imagine their faces. And of course, I always need to stop and thank our funders that help make this work possible. Okay, question number one, why sing? Why sing a duet? Well, let's back up a little bit and let's say, well, why do birds sing at all, right? Here is a song sparrow. This is a bird that we have in Oregon. We talked about song sparrows earlier today, right? In one of the meetings I had. This is the song of a song sparrow. And you will recall, right, how to read this. We got pitch on the y-axis, time on the x-axis. And I'm going to play this one, and maybe you're getting better at following along. Oops. Oddly, this one's not working. Okay, well, the song sparrow is the least important thing, so I guess that's okay if it doesn't work. Oh. This is at quarter speed. You follow along when it's slow, at least? Yeah. Birds are much better at processing these things than we are. Their brains are much better tuned to this. Okay, so quarter speed is usually just about right for us. Why does the song sparrow sing? Well, the song sparrow sings for two purposes, right? And the same song has both purposes at the same time, right? The first is to attract female mates, and the second is to defend a territory against other males. Okay? And I say this in this particular direction in terms of sexes, because it's really only the male song sparrows that tend to sing, right? And so their function is to attract females and defend other males. And that is actually true for just about all the birds that we have here in Oregon. And in fact, it's mostly true for other birds at temperate latitudes, right? Only males sing. Song functions mostly to attract females and defend territories. But if we go down to the tropical latitudes, like where we are in Mexico right now, males and females often sing. Right? It's interesting. It's the trait has been lost in females that have colonized North America and other northern latitudes. Okay, when both males and females sing, that creates this great opportunity for them to sing together and create these duets. Okay, but still, the question is, why sing duets? Right? If male song sparrows are getting on just fine by singing, by themselves, why should birds sing duets? Okay. There's been a lot of interest in this question, right? This is something that's been around in the literature for a long time. So like anything like that, there's lots of hypotheses. Okay. The two that have received the most support are these two, joint territory defense and mate guarding. Okay. Joint territory defense, the idea is that the two birds can work together by singing and defending their territory, right? Two birds collaborating on something is going to be a stronger signal. They're going to be more likely to defend their territory. This is inherently a cooperative hypothesis, right? It says the nature of duetting is this cooperation. Okay. In contrast, mate guarding is really the opposite. It stems from conflict between the sexes, right? And the idea is if one bird sings and tries to attract a new mate, somebody else is going to jump in on top of it and say, "Oh, nope, he's taken, right? That's my mate," or she's taken. Either way, okay. And so is it cooperative or is it really a conflict signal? Okay. There's been a lot of interest, lots of mixed results. So we decided to pursue this with Happy Wrens. Each of these two hypotheses makes different unique predictions, right? So mate guarding predicts that unmated intruders of the same sex should be the greatest threat, okay? Should be greater than an opposite sex intruder or a paired intruder, right? Because they're the ones that are going to steal your mate. Joint territory defense predicts essentially the opposite, which is that mated intruders should be at least equal or maybe greater threats than unmated intruders, okay? Because two birds are more likely to be able to steal your territory than one bird is. Yeah? Okay, what's the function in Happy Wrens? Well, to answer a question like this, we can do a playback experiment where we simulate intruders coming in and sort of advertising in a bird's territory. Okay, so we have two speakers, and we use a two-speaker design so we can simulate pairs in a spatially realistic way, right? So you can have, you know, a male in one speaker and a female in the other speaker, like you've heard here today, right? So we simulate pairs, but we'd also simulate single intruders, a male or a female, and we had a control from a sympatric, another species with a similar sound, okay? We used a repeated measures design at 17 pairs that we tested, and we asked the question, well, do they respond differently? Birds can respond to aggressive intruders in a variety of different ways, okay? One thing they might do would be to sing back, right? So song is potentially an aggressive signal. So if we look at the total number of songs that a bird sings in response, where we've got high numbers being a more aggressive response and low numbers being a less aggressive response. For our control treatment, different species, the duet, the female, and the male solo, what you can see is that the males basically, they increase their song rate anytime there's an intruder on their territory. Okay? Females do something slightly different, which is that they respond more to female intruders, but they don't distinguish mated versus unmated intruders. Okay, and that's that last part that's really critical as far as distinguishing between these hypotheses. Okay, so that suggests that it's a cooperative signal of joint territory defense. Okay. So they're working together to defend the territory, but then if you start looking even closer, so when you've got two speakers, you can start thinking about, okay, well, which speaker do they actually move towards? Which individual are they trying to, you know, drive out of their territory? And for the males, nearly all of them approached most closely to the male speaker. Okay, we see the same thing for the female speaker. And so what I think this means is that really what we have is this cooperative signal in duetting, but we also have a division of labor, right? Where the males are chiefly in charge of driving out the males and the females are chiefly in charge of driving out the females. Okay, okay, so we can rule out mate guarding, and that suggests that the function of duetting in happy wrens is joint territory defense. And this has also been now tested for a variety of other wrens, and some others that I'm going to tell you about today, and it seems to be the case for most of these wren species. Okay. Okay. Now, then that brings up the question, why do they have repertoires? I told you, I showed you, and played even a couple of these for you. These guys have repertoires of songs. They don't just have one duet. But what I didn't tell you is that they don't actually have 3 songs. They instead have more like 30 or 40 different duet songs in their repertoire. Okay. Why do they have such big repertoires of duet songs? This seems like really a lot to keep track of, right? Why do they do it? Well, let's back up again and start thinking about our birds in Oregon, right? So what is the function of song repertoires when only or primarily the male sings? Okay. Here's our song sparrow. He's got a repertoire of about 10 songs. And we know that if he sings a particular song, his neighbors can either sing exactly that same song back, or they can sing another song that's not the same song, right? When he sings the same song back, that's called a type match. They're matching the type of song. And this is treated as a really aggressive signal, right? This is going to escalate the interaction. Whereas if he sings a song that's not shared, then that's a de-escalation signal, okay? So having a repertoire allows for this really flexible interaction with rivals in song sparrows as well as many other species of temperate birds. Is the same thing true for duets, right? Do duetting birds also use song type matching to signaling aggression to intruders? Well, one of the problems with doing this kind of study in the field is that if you care about what one bird thinks in response to, say, a territorial intruder, well, it's really difficult to assess because her mate's always there doing something, right? So you don't know if she's responding to the intruder or she's responding to her mate. Okay? So we figured out an ingenious way to solve this problem, which is we went out and caught the mate. Caught him in a mist net, put him in a little cage right before dark, held him in the lab overnight, and then we could go back out the next morning, first thing, and she probably didn't even know he was gone because we did it, basically they were just sleeping during that time. And we could ask her, how do you respond to a female intruder, right? And we could also simulate her mate responding to this intruder too, okay? And see how she chooses her songs under this situation. Here's what it looks like. So we took 2 different duets from their repertoires, okay? From each one, we removed one of the sex's components, right? So we have one channel that just has female songs, one channel that just has male songs, okay? The first one, and then we played the stereo file back, again, in a 2-speaker design, right? The first one represents a female intruder, right? So this is she treats this as another female on her territory. And then we simulate her male's response to it. Okay, but critically, he's singing a different song than she should if she wants to match it. Okay, so each of these responses has a different prediction in terms of what she should choose to respond with. If she is type matching, she should sing this song. But if she's following what her male does, she should sing this song instead. Okay, what does she actually do? Okay. If we look at the number of females that are singing either of these things, either for matching the song of the female intruder aggressively or following along with their partner, and this is compared to an expected response if they're just kind of choosing songs at random from a repertoire of 30, you could see that really what they're doing is they're following along with their partner, right? Okay, so they're kind of ignoring what the intruder's doing, or at least choosing preferentially to sing with their partner. Okay. This and they're also choosing those songs that we recorded before, right? So that tells us that they have a particular way of combining male and female songs in their head. We call this a duet code, right? So these are pair-specific song combinations that they have in their brains, right, for combining this repertoire of 40 different song types. Okay, here's what this looks like. So imagine that we've got a pair that each bird has 3 different songs in their repertoire, A, B, C for each. Okay, the duet code says that A will always go with A, B will always go with B, and C will always go with C. Right? So we have a specific way of combining these songs. Okay. But what's really interesting is you can imagine another pair that had exactly those same 3 songs in their repertoire, and they would combine them in a totally different way, right? So in this case, A goes with B, B goes with C, and C goes with A. So these are pair-specific answering rules that are stored in the brain, and each pair seems to agree upon, how they're going to combine songs, and it's different for every single pair. You can think of it sort of as like a passcode. Like this, I think this is where the idea of duet coding comes from, right? It's a password between, the 2 individuals share. Now, I told you not to forget about this little male in the cage, and that's because the next morning we also did an experiment with him. Okay, so we took him down to the football pitch, and there he is sitting up on a little wooden stump. We've got some speakers there, and we could then do playbacks with him to simulate his mate. Okay, and what we were really interested in is whether or not he could assess different distances of her, and whether he changed his song to accommodate that, and also, whether he changed his song to accommodate how quickly she was singing. Okay, so we presented a series or several series of 6 female phrases that looked like this. Okay? And we changed how fast they played, right? So we had some that were really fast, some that were kind of intermediate, and some that were slow. And we asked, do birds actually attend to the tempo of their partner's singing? And well, with these 3 songs, hopefully you can see the answer is yes. Actually, they're different, right? The males are adjusting their singing depending on what their female's doing. Okay, and of course, there's data that goes along with that too. If we look at the male reply tempo and the female playback tempo, you see that it actually follows this 1-to-1 line pretty well. Right? And all 3 of these treatments are statistically different too. Okay? So males pay attention to each female song phrase, and they adjust their own song rate to match her tempo. Right? They're not little robots. They're actually very carefully listening for what their partner's doing. Okay. Do males also follow a duet code like the females do? And if we look at the percent of songs that the male sang that follow the duet code, we see that they do this much more than you would expect by chance, right? So the vast majority of males are singing the correct song that should go with the female song. And think about what's going on, right? So the male's just sitting here in a cage, and all of a sudden, with no other cues, the female sings, he hears his mate sing, and he responds immediately with the right song from his repertoire. Okay? Here's what this might look like, for a male. Here's a male's eye view, right? It's dark out. He's in some unfamiliar place. There's no visual cues, right? You could see the thing was covered by a bandana. A few other species are starting to sing. He's ignoring them, though. But pretty soon you're going to see when the female sings, it's going to pop up on the top to tell you. And you can see what he does. Okay. He's just sitting there, primed to sing. He is constantly listening for what she's doing, first thing in the morning with no other cues, right? He responds immediately. He selects the right song to do this, to follow the duet code, right? And if you think about everything that has to happen in his brain in order for this to actually work, it's really remarkable, right? He has to realize, okay, this is the happy wren. It's not one of all those other species that was singing. I only respond to happy wrens. He has to know it's a female. He probably knows it's his mate. He figures out which song type she's singing out of 40, and then figures out which reply song type of his own repertoire goes with what she sang. And he also has to figure out the timing of it, because each of her phrases is a different length, right? And if he's going to get right on that, timing-wise, he needs to figure out how long her phrase is going to last, right? All of this processing happens in less than half a second, right? Which I think is really, truly astounding. Okay, so here's what I told you about happy wrens. They have large repertoires, and pairs follow these duet codes, right? Pair-specific passcodes. Both sexes listen really attentively to their mate songs, and they adjust the song selection and timing to fit with what their partners are doing. Okay, and so when you put all these things together, our working hypothesis is that the reason that these birds have these elaborate duet repertoires with really difficult timing and many songs that fit together is that it's a cooperative signal. And we think what's going on is the reason it's so hard to do is because this helps signal to your mate how invested you are in this relationship, right? Or demonstrates commitment to your mate. And so that's a great idea as far as happy wrens go, but what we really want to start thinking about is the evolution of vocal signals in general, right? So can we say something a bit bigger about the evolution of these coordinated duets? Luckily, we have a good phylogeny from Keith Barker, and we can plot, here's the happy wren. You're familiar with their songs now, Fugopedius felix. Okay? We can also look at some of these other species. So here's a white-browed wren in the Thriotherus genus. And hopefully from looking at the sonogram, you can say, oh, gosh, there's no red, only the male sings. Here's what it sounds like. Okay. Here's the rufous and white wren in the Thriophilus genus. Here the male sings something, and then the female does something after it. Right? Basically the same thing after it. Sounds like this. Okay, and last in the Cantorculus genus, we have an example of a buff-breasted wren. And you can probably guess from looking at the sonogram that this is going to be extremely well coordinated. Here's what it sounds like. Okay, so we have a real range of signaling styles, degree of coordination, as well as complexity. And what we decided to do was measure the coordination and complexity of these different species and see if we could make sense of them on the phylogeny. And so here's what coordination looks like. So each species gets a range with error bars of the mean coordination. If we move over to the right, then these are going to be alternating duets, right? Where there's no overlap, but the two individuals alternate back and forth. If we move over to the left here in these cooler colors, this is going to be coordination, but coordination in that they're both singing at the same time. So kind of a different kind of coordination, right? What we're really interested in is this antiphonal duetting, because this seems like it's even more difficult to produce. If you overlay these same colors on the phylogeny, you can really see that we have several different species that have really intensely coordinated duets, okay? That are, you can see in the hot colors, the reds and the oranges. Right? And hopefully what you can see here is that really well coordinated duets seem to have evolved multiple times, right? So it's evolved multiple times within one genus, but it's also evolved in multiple genera. Okay? And so that seems really interesting. What would be driving this evolution of coordination? And so we went and we measured a whole bunch of different natural history and ecological parameters, and you threw a whole bunch of different things into the model. And what came out as by far the best predictor of coordination across species was breeding season length. Okay? So those species that have longer breeding seasons have much more coordinated duets. Okay? And I think this is a nice finding because it really fits with these ideas that I was talking about with Happy Wrens, right? And suggests that antiphonal duetting could have really evolved to signal pair commitment, right? Why do you have more coordinated duets for species that have really long breeding seasons? It's because it's hard to do, right? And that really helps signal your commitment to your partner. Okay. The last thing I want to talk to you about, and this is actually the whole reason I got into studying duetting birds, is whether or not birds need to learn how to do all of these really complex things that I've just told you about, right? And if you think about what might be required to learn, there's a whole next level from what, say, temperate male songbirds would have to learn. Okay? They have to first learn sex-specific song phrases. So you have to learn what's a male song and what's a female song. Okay? You have to learn the rules for singing these male-female duets. How do you combine male and female songs? Maybe they have to learn the duet codes for combining specific male and female songs together, right? To form this code. And maybe they also have to learn the timing of all of these different songs in order to create these perfectly alternating duets, right? Do they do all of this? I told you birdsong is a great model for human language, right? But of course, if we're only thinking about males, well, that doesn't really tell us that much about human language, where of course both sexes learn and we have really complex conversations, right? Maybe this is a better model. Let's see if they actually have to learn these things, okay? Oh, so we get to leave Mexico and we take you on our next stop on our field trip. A bit farther south in Central America, we're going to go to Costa Rica. We worked on a couple different species of wrens in Costa Rica. The first place I'm going to take you is La Selva, which is a field station run by OTS. Maybe some of you have been there. This is work that I did with Esme Cueros and Carla Rivera. And the first species that I'm going to introduce you to is the canebrake wren. Okay. This species is interesting in that it has an introductory note that the male sings, okay? And then the female jumps in and initiates the duet, okay? And then we have a typical alternating male-female, male-female, male-female duet like before, okay? So this one sounds like this. Okay, same stuff as before, big repertoires, intensely coordinated duets in this particular species. Do they have to learn this, right? And does this learning take place, early or late during development? How can we figure it out? Okay. So what we did was we followed a bunch of juveniles during ontogeny. Okay. So for up to 2 months each. And we had assessed how well they adhered to the rules governing the duet code, as well as the timing, and whether or not this changed over time. Okay? And here's a sonogram where I've traced over in our typical male and female colors, but now also there's a juvenile singing. Okay, so this is a juvenile female in purple. And what you can see is that, well, she's pretty rubbish, right? So she's got the song type more or less down, but the timing is absolutely dreadful, right? Okay, so juveniles sing much less coordinated duets than adults. If we look at the overlapping, the degree of overlapping for adults, you see it's basically 0, right? These are perfectly coordinated duets in this species, but juveniles have quite a lot of overlap, and that's true for both male and female juveniles. Okay? However, like many things, with practice, they get better, right? So if we have the same axis here and we look across time, right, you can see that with time, they're getting much better in terms of the timing, okay? And so here is an older juvenile singing, and now the purple and the red are so closely timed that you can't really tell the difference, right? So she's learned the timing of this song. Coordination improves through ontogeny. That's sort of our definition of learning, right? What about song type selection? Well, we see the same thing. Adults really only choose one phrase per phrase that their partner sings, but there's a lot more variation for juveniles, okay? So adults follow a duet code really carefully. Juveniles don't do as good a job. But again, with time, this adherence to the duet code improves. Okay, so juveniles seem to be learning both the timing and the duet code from their parents. And I should say juveniles in this species have a really protracted juvenile stage where they stay on their natal territory for 6 or maybe even 9 months. Okay, but at some point, they have to leave their natal territory and they have to go, disperse and recruit to a new territory and find their own mate and fall in love, right? What happens when a bird gets a new mate? He's learned this duet code from his parents, but probably that bird also learned a duet code from its parents. And remember, all the duet codes are pair specific. So how do they actually combine their songs to form a duet of their own, right? So we had a 5-year study of a marked population of riverside wrens, just a short flight. It's not worth showing a video because it's only an hour puddle hop, to get over there on the Osa Peninsula. These guys have really similar songs, so I won't play it for you. But what we find is that if we look at the duet codes for the same pair across years, the number of new duet codes we detect doesn't really change across time. But when a bird gets a new mate, right, all of a sudden we have a lot more duet codes, right? And sometimes this is, the mate dies. Sometimes this is just divorce. And in this species, we seem to get high rates of divorce for some reason. So we have lots of data on this. Okay. So this tells us that these new duet codes must be learned each time a bird remates, right? And this is the thing that really surprised us is this seems to be true even if the new mate has some of the same songs, right? So instead of just using that same, recycling that old duet code, they seem to, find a new duet code together collaboratively. Okay. Okay, and so here's our model for duet song learning. Young birds seem to learn their song phrases and the general rules for duetting early on during development. Okay. They also learn duet code and duet coordination from their parents during this kind of protracted juvenile stage, right? So they're learning all of this stuff from their parents, but ultimately they have to leave, okay? And then they have to learn again, right? They have to learn a totally new set of rules for combining their songs, both in terms of the phrase choices and in terms of the timing. Okay? So there's quite a lot going on here, and as far as learning goes. Okay. Our last stop on our tour, we're going to leave Central America and we're going to go down to South America. because briefly I want to tell you about one last species of wrens. We're going to go down to Ecuador, okay, and you can see here are the Andes, this real big string of giant volcanoes. And if we zoom in on the Central Valley, there's Quito up at the top of the screen, and we're going to kind of zoom in onto this volcano called Pasachoa. And this is one of our field sites for studying this species of bird. Here's a kind of picture of what the habitat looks like. Really neat habitat way up high in the mountains, all made of chusca bamboo. Okay? These are big wrens. Those of you that work on birds, these are 35-gram wrens. So they're absolutely enormous for wrens. And they sing like it. They got a big song to go with it that sounds like this. I love this song. This could go on forever. And in fact, the birds go on forever. They will sing for 5 minutes straight without stopping. This just keeps going. It's like you're at a rave or something. Again, it's made up of males and females. Okay. And here's a sonogram of what it looks like. Okay. Now, if you look closely at this sonogram, you can see a couple things. The first is that unlike everything else I've told you before, where it's just male, female, we got A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B. This actually has 4 parts, right? So now we have A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, where the male sings A and C and the female sings B and D, right? So this adds a whole level of complexity that we don't have in any of these other species, which is really cool, but that's actually not the reason that I've been studying these birds. The reason to study these birds is because this song is, oh, sorry, it plays first. Okay, so you can follow along. Maybe. Okay, 4-part duet created not by 2 birds, but by a whole group, right? And you can have up to 7 birds that are all contributing to this same perfectly coordinated duet, okay? You'd never know it, but they're all actually singing together, okay? And there's a couple ways you can tell that from the sonogram. One thing I haven't told you about sonograms yet is that the brighter the image, the louder or the higher the amplitude of the signal, okay? So you can see that if we look at this first C phrase, you'll see this is really quiet compared to this later C phrase. And that's because there's only 1 bird singing here, but there's 2 or 3 males that are singing at exactly the same time here, making it much louder, okay? If we zoom in a little bit, then you can really start seeing, okay, there was one point where 2 males got slightly off in terms of the timing. And you can see 2 individual traces of exactly the same phrase, right? But, by the time they got over to C, they'd sorted it out already, right? So it's kind of rare that you get multiple traces. They are so perfectly well coordinated. And just so you don't have to take my word for it, here is an absolutely dreadful video that I shot. It's a good thing I'm a biologist, not a videographer. But it shows you 3 different birds singing, okay? And you can actually see their beaks moving. Let's see. You see the 3 birds? Okay, you get the idea. Again, this could go on for minutes and minutes, and actually I love this song, so I could listen to it all day. But you get the idea. This is a great place to end because it's one of my very favorite bird songs. So let me summarize where we've gone today and answered those 4 questions, okay? We've talked about how wren duets function primarily for joint territorial defense, and coordination seems to have evolved really to signal commitment to your mate. Okay? Both males and females follow a pair-specific duet codes when they're selecting song types. Individuals adjust their singing to temporally coordinate their duets with their mate. And this really suggests this rapid cognitive processing that's happening, we know, in less than half a second. Juveniles have to learn how to do this, right? So they have to learn both how to coordinate their duet codes and how to coordinate their timing. And this happens during ontogeny. They also then have to learn how to reform a new duet code with their future mate and every future mate that they have for the rest of their life. And last, I told you that one species, or at least one population of one species, sings these highly coordinated choruses. And this is something that we're really diving into a lot right now. And hopefully next time I talk to you, I'll be able to tell you more about how and why that happens. Thank you very much.
Question for Chris?
So you mentioned that some of these species at least have high divorce rates. Do you see a degradation of the coordination before the divorce? Like, can that predict whether or not birds are going to stick together?
That's a great question, and I don't think we really have the data to answer it, but that's exactly what you'd predict. And that seems like something we should maybe think about if we have data to go and check it out. It's really only the riverside wrens, that species, that we really see much for divorce rate. In general, tropical birds tend to stick together more, and that seems to be true for these wrens. I don't know what's going on with that species that you have high divorces. But yeah, that's a great idea. Let's look at it.
Do they defend territories all year?
They do. Yeah, and they tend to have really protracted breeding seasons too. So they have a 9-month breeding season in many of these species, and they're not breeding for that whole time, but they could have multiple clutches during that time. But they're year round.
I have more questions.
Go ahead.
I'll wait.
Yeah.
Well, I was really interested in one of the things you didn't get to address about how anthropogenic noise affects. So if you have a short clip that you could tell us, like, if this is being disrupted.
Yeah. So it has just catastrophic effects, really. So I haven't actually looked at noise in these birds. I had a student that started to, and then it fell apart for a bunch of reasons. But we've done noise with a variety of other things, looking at how it impacts alarm calls, for example. So one of the studies we did was with great tits in Europe, and living by this highway in this otherwise pristine habitat in kind of Bavaria, right? And we showed a couple things. Like, we showed that if birds are exposed to noise, they can actually combat that. And they do the same thing that we do, which is that they essentially talk louder, right? When it's noisy, we talk louder. We do it without even realizing it. And lots of animals do this. It's even got a name. It's called the Lumbar Effect, right? So they can do this, but we also showed then on the other side that it doesn't matter, right? They can't do it enough to actually transmit their signals. And so then if you're on the other side and you're listening for alarm calls and you don't hear them, there's a good chance that you could get eaten, right? And so that's one of the things we've been working on. More recently, I've been really interested in how noise affects cognition. And of course, I got into it because of bioacoustics, but the cognitive aspects are really fascinating to me. And so we've done a bunch of experiments where birds are performing these complicated foraging tasks, right, where they have to learn new skills. And just hearing traffic noise in the background seems to be enough to make it take twice as long to learn a whole bunch of different skills, on this cognitive battery. So really, there's a lot going on with noise, and it's becoming a big field. And we got a whole bunch of other projects going on too. One of the things I'm really excited about is they're closing the airport in Jackson in the Tetons this year, and so we're trying to get some before and after data from how that affects all the animals living in the national park right there. So yeah, a whole bunch of things with noise too. And I think it would be really interesting to look at noise with these guys because they're so sensitive, right? And they're constantly listening. You can imagine that noise would potentially really impact their communication within the pairs.
Yeah. So early on, you showed some hypothesis about the duet having some strengthening some cooperation with the pair. But earlier than that, behavioral, is there any use of the duet for the choice? See some possibilities for mutual kind of testing there, mutual choice, and some kind of sexual selection, good genes type of idea there.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely the potential for that. What you might see is that because they have generally long breeding seasons, right? There should be a lot of commitment to your mates. So you should choose them carefully, right? And so you may be much more likely to commit to a mate that's paying attention to you and learning your duets repertoire quickly and learning how to integrate with you really quickly. We see in a few studies that have done this, we see that it seems to happen pretty fast, that they kind of settle on a new duet code and are duetting within just a few days of when the pair comes together, both from kind of natural deaths and also removal studies. So it happens pretty fast, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if that is under selection.
But do you know if in the species there is a choosier sex?
If there, sorry, I didn't hear the last
one
part.
of the sexes is choosier than the other one?
I don't know in these species. Yeah, typically in birds it tends to be the female, and which is why the males are singing to attract the female. Once you get down to the tropics and both individuals are singing and they're sexually monomorphic in terms of plumage and whatnot, yeah, don't know, but it'd certainly be interesting to look at.
I have an online question from Barb Taylor, and she says, very interesting talk. Is anything known about brain song centers and their involvement in the duetting coordination?
Yes, so I guess I don't really see anybody here, but I'm gonna look, actually that's not the camera. I don't know where the camera is. Okay, thanks for the question, wherever you are. And yes, so there have been a few studies. So like temperate birds, they have a dedicated neural hardware, right, that has several different song nuclei that are devoted to song learning. So there's one circuit that's devoted to song learning, another circuit that's devoted to song production. There have been two studies that have looked at these song nuclei in response in duetting birds. And they're absolutely fascinating. So one was a few years ago that showed that both individuals, both the male and the female, have the whole duet stored in their brain, right? I think it's HVC and RA if you know the different nuclei. And so, both are responsive in each sex. Okay, and then there was a new paper that just came out, I don't know, a few months ago now, that showed that although both individuals essentially have the duet stored in their brain, what we have is an inhibitory neurons that fire during their own sex component of the duet, right? So when they hear the partner's song, that inhibits them producing I said it backwards, the inhibitory neurons on their partner's song, right? So that inhibits their production of the partner's song, and then those inhibitory neurons go away, and we have excitatory neurons that enable them to produce their own component of the duet, right? So the whole thing's going on in their brain, but we have activation and inhibition that's controlling which part is actually produced, which is really neat. We have some evidence from this riverside wren of young birds actually singing both parts of the duet too, which really fits with this model. Yeah.
So this is kind of like, I think where Felipe was going to. Is there anything like super sexy males or females, like, there's a Beyonce or something that's just, I don't even know who the males would be. I'd have to ask my mother. Anyway, that just stick out somehow, like they're, because you can get, brightly blue males or guys doing better displays. So are there guys or gals that are just like super sexy that you can figure out, and so they're, they have more access to mates or whatever. And the other one I was going to say is, which is totally different, is what about extra pair copulation? Anything, you know anything about that?
Okay, let me do with Beyonce to start with. We don't know of Beyonce's existing in duetting birds, though it's quite possible, right? With most of these tropical systems, we just don't know as much as we do with temperate systems because they're much poorer studied. With temperate systems, we definitely know of Beyonce's, right? So but of course, we're only really talking about males. Males can have bigger repertoires, and that makes them sexier. Males can also do, really physiologically difficult to produce sounds, right? And in particular, like trills, right? So if you go from high to low, that's really hard to do because you have to reset your vocal apparatus, right? And so individuals that are able to do really fast trills or really wide band trills from high to low seem to be much sexier too. So there's some pretty good data from temperate birds that we don't know much about the tropics, so it's certainly possible. As far as extra pair stuff goes, also hard to assess because we don't have a lot of data on breeding, and you have 9-month breeding season. It's hard to get. There's one study, the general thought is that tropical birds should have much lower levels of extra pair paternity, and there seems to be pretty good evidence of that, or some evidence of that. In wrens in particular, there's only one study, it's the rufous and white wren, where it took them, I think, 12 years to get enough data to actually look at it, and they had very low levels of extra pair paternity, almost none. And that really, that again fits with this idea of really being committed to your mate.
Do we want to, I could ask this over here too.
Maybe we should. All right, so let's thank Chris again for a nice talk, and join us at Downward Dog if you're looking for a beer after this. We'll be there. It'll give us a few minutes to get over there. So thanks.
Thanks, everybody.